I just run for it. Oh, okay. Everyone go ahead and start. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. The objective of today is to run into some subject matter experts who speak about solar and what it is and is not at a 30,000 foot view, if you will. But we're not going to get into details of one particular field or another particular field of that nature. If you have those kinds of questions, we'll be glad to stick around afterwards and ask. First and foremost, I want to thank our agreement committee. You got it all on the side. The ladies agree. Everything you folks have done through our county attorney and everyone coming out. There's been a lot of conversation in the community as to what solar is and is not. So we really wanted to bring some subject matter experts in to discuss this. So without further ado,
Brianna, where's that coming from?
computer. And just so you all know, this is being recorded. So what we'll do is we'll record this on my phone here. We'll turn that over and get that up on our website as quickly as possible. We also have to be here today, and they're going to televise it at a later date. So this will be televised and will be up on our website as quickly as possible. So.
Thank you, TJ. Appreciate you having us out for things. So I'm with Orion, one of the developer of the Build Energy projects, and we worked with TJ to bring these experts in tonight. So I'll do very little talking, but we just wanted to, kind of set the structure. We'll kind of go through it very high level with each expert, and then we'll go through Q&A, and then we can get on the folks behind it. And if folks can't see the screen, come grab the after. I'm going to walk through some of the illustrations on here, but I want to walk through how solar and battery storage works. So for solar, top right, you've got sunlight, panels, and it's converted from direct current through an inverter to alternating current, and then sent on to the electricity grid. So at a very high level, that's how solar works. Battery storage, it charges, it stores electricity when there's peak supply on the system, and then the electricity system needs the electrons, it sends the electrons to the grid in a similar way that solar does. For these projects, these are privately financed projects where developers are holding all the risk on the project. And for us, we go in there, we know that, and that there's potential for these projects not to move forward. We do our best to make sure we have these types of meetings and engage as many folks as possible throughout the development process itself. So with that intro, I'm going to turn it over to Garrett Wood, who's going to cover all things batteries and safety.
All right. I'm not used to my name is Eric Wood. I am the Director of Training for Energy Safety Response Group. Our company is made up of either active or retired firefighters from kind of range across the United States. A portion of us reside in New York. I'm from Ohio. Please don't hold that against me. And then we do have a team that is based out west in the Phoenix area. There's a lot that our company does as it relates to battery storage systems. Some of the stuff that we do is we do destructive tests on large-scale lithium-ion batteries. We've now performed close to 400 plus lithium-ion tests to date, and we're still ongoing with that. That's just a small portion of kind of what our company does. Some of the other things that we do, when I got into this a little bit more, but there's a thing known as standard technical panels that relate to the codes and standards that I'm going to talk briefly about today. With those standard technical panels, my company, I shouldn't say my company, the company that I work for, we sit on. So the related to how battery energy storage systems get integrated and implemented, we're part of that structuring process. Then we also do variations of permitting phases. We do a lot of the documentation as it relates to projects. I've had the opportunity to travel all over the lower 48 times. I've been to Mexico twice. So we travel quite consistently as it relates to this specific industry. So on the first slide, one of the big things that I want to talk about is the actual safety and how it's designed in layers. When we look at battery energy storage systems, we first have to look at the prescribed codes and standards related to battery energy storage systems. So the two main focal points I'm going to talk about very briefly is the National Fire Protection NFPA and underwriting laboratories. That is the overarching standard as it relates to battery energy storage systems. Basically what that does is it takes companies industry-wide and it gives them the playbook on how to go through the commissioning process all the way through the deep process. And then it isolates other different standards and codes within that 855 structure as well. For UL, the underwriter laboratory, there's two specific tests within this industry that every technology has to abide by. That's UL 9540 and UL 9548. So these are not things that can be circumvented, these are not things that can't be implemented or not done. Everything within this industry, again, has to abide by all codes and standards as it relates to NFPA and sorry. When we start looking a little bit deeper into these prescribed codes and standards, we start talking about the layers of safety that are integrated in. Everything that's engineered across this industry has redundant safety mechanisms built into the battery energy storage systems. So specific things, management systems. I like to talk about this one because for me it made sense when I first got into this a little over 7 years ago. So we all have one of these really cool devices. We like using them, they're in our hands. I've got 3 kids, I can't get them off of it, right? But a lot remember that back in 2010, 2011, the Samsung Galaxy Note was having a lot of issues and was not operating correctly. And it would have failures in people's minds. So what ends up happening with that, battery inside there that is not regulated correctly. It is not the health of it, the charger, all the aspects of that specific battery are not looked at. Now, what we have is a battery management system inside of your phone. So if you ever take your phone, you set it outside for way too long, it's way too hot, what does your phone tell you? You can't use it right now. And the reason being is because that battery management system that's integrated into your phone is saying, we need to pull it down before you can use it again. Or when you're charging your phone. Now we have smart chargers in your phone that actually says that when you plug it in at night and you go to sleep, it says that it's going to not charge fully until 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, just plug it in at 10 o'clock at night. Again, that's that battery management system that is working specifically on that phone because it wants to maintain the state of health and the state of charge. When we look at the battery management system as it relates to the energy storage systems, now we're talking about a larger and more robust type battery management system. Again, that is a redundant safety layer that's integrated in and has to be tested and evaluated by underwriting laboratories. Other things that we have to focus on when we look at these specific things, when we look at the safety standards, when we talk about battery energy storage systems, is the redundancy aspect. It's not just the battery management system, but it's also the thermal management system. It's the actual outer shell that the system is comprised of. Everything within that specific enclosure has to be monitored 24/7, 365. So it never is not looked at or never not viewed at any given point of the day is constantly evaluated, not only by the battery management system, the thermal management system, and a handful of other safety assets integrated in, but there is a network operations center 24/7 that's monitoring this site and this system all day, every day. The focal point behind that is because we are looking to prevent thermal runaway. That is the main focal point at the end of the day. We do not want to see thermal runaway occur. So what ends up happening is that when you have a cell in there that starts to have an issue, that battery management system has the ability to go in and say, we're going to isolate it and shut it down. That's the biggest thing when you look at the redundant safety aspects of the system. Then that network operations center it comes into play, and they have policies and procedures which they have to follow and prescribe codes and standards that they have to abide by to ensure that this final action is the correct action that needs to be taken as it relates to these specific energy storage systems. And that's nationwide, that's industry-wide, that's not just. So that's just kind of in a nutshell what these safety redundant systems have to integrate in. We talk about battery energy storage systems. The last thing I want to talk about, and I've taken up a little bit more time than I originally intended, but I think it's very important to discuss. So I want to go one of the things that ESRG does, because we're either active or retired firefighters, is we go out and we train fire service. That is our main thing, because we know that systems like these are all over the country. We know that they're working through procurement processes, so we have to ensure that the knowledge and the training is provided to every fire department in the jurisdiction we have the opportunity to come in contact with. So we do provide that training on how many times that fire department wants to be trained. And then the owner, operator, or developer, industry-wide, is the one that covers the cost. So that is not a cost to the fire department that does not come out of their budget. The owner, operator, developer has to penny up the money, and then they bring us in and we provide what's known as our battery 101. It's roughly about a 2.5 hour training session that we take them through because we want to make sure that we're starting from the small to the large. The other thing that my company requires is that we do the site walk. So that means once all the permitting phase is completely done and everything's getting ready to be commissioned, before everything goes online, we then come back. We take the fire department out the site and we do a site visit. So it's their way to tour the facility, get boots on the ground, see what's there. And then from a firefighter's perspective, we like pictures. We want to take as many pictures as possible because there's specific safety aspects. We talk about safety redundancies. There are multiple redundancies across the entire site. And we take pictures of it and then it goes to a site-specific emergency response plan. At the end of the day, that emergency response plan, that is not the first time the fire department has seen it. We ensure the fire department from the beginning to the end has the availability and the time to read it, look at it, and then have input back to us about things that they want to see dedicated to that site-specific emergency response plan. So that's just a little bit about what we do. I'm going to hand this over to Chris, and then
Thanks, Eric. Good evening, folks. My name is Dr. Chris Olson. I'm a PhD in environmental health sciences. Some of you may think I'm familiar. I was here last week in the county at the battery storage hearing that they had at the HC. So I'll cover some of the stuff that we did there. For the last 25 years, I'm a private consultant, third-party consultant to industry. I've worked, my specialty is proper siting of energy projects to ensure the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. So I've worked on everything from natural gas plants, coal plants, pipelines, wind turbines, battery storage, solar, you name it. It produces electricity. I've worked on it over the years. So if we go to the next slide here, I'm going to spend more of my time focusing on this presentation on some solar side of the house. The first thing is, often we hear concerns that there's going to be leaching of toxic material from the solar panels getting into the soil, getting into the groundwater. We certainly understand in this community where solar projects are being proposed and located, everybody's on well water, so we need to make sure that's protected. As Eric was doing, I'll do the same thing with my cell phone here, right? So if you look at what the solar panels are comprised of, there's an aluminum frame, and tempered glass. Tempered glass is almost identical to what you have here in your phone. And then you've got the solar cells themselves, and again, actually the glass. It's mostly silicon glass for these panels. There is some trace amounts of heavy metals, and there's some trace amounts of chemicals, just like in your phone. So the key is there's no liquid in the panels, just like there's no liquid in your phone. If you think about the technologies we've changed over the years with our phones, it used to be you look at your phone funny 15 years ago and the screen would crack, it would break. We'd walk around with our phones in pockets forever with a broken screen and kids did whatever. Nothing is leaching out of that phone, nothing's coming into contact with you, so you throw it out in your yard, leave it there while it's raining and it's still fine. The same thing is true with cameras. So even if it's broken, there's a tornado here, of course, I think it's about a year ago now, almost, there's 6 months or so, say 120 months. There's a swap where some of the panels were dislodged good, but they weren't thrown, hundreds of feet, thousands of feet. I mean, basically, if the tornadoes can come through, it's going to actually folks well know who in this area of the world, tornadoes are not good things. The good news is that it's just a physical cleanup issue. It's nothing to do, there's no leaching of any impact. The other thing that the author hurts, of course, is that you're taking land, you're having an engineer to make sure that the panels in. There's very significant stormwater management planning and stormwater controls design, so that there's no, then, again, there's something going to leach off these panels. We're making sure we're not flooding neighbors' fields. We're not going to be doing any of that. And again, so part of the entire design under IDAM, under the part of management, all of those plans have to be approved by IDAM before construction begins. So a couple other things, of course, with solar and battery storage projects is the big one we're concerned about is sound. If I'm talking like this, my voice is about 70, you're hearing me at about 70 decibels or dBA. If I stop talking, I'm going to read it beforehand, and if a little one wasn't as vocal, the level of just having the HVAC system running the air conditioner in that room is about 52 or 53 decibels in here. And to put that in perspective, so if everyone was really quiet about that, your county ordinance actually goes a step further than many counties, where it requires a sound standard of 55 to met property lines, and then that's even lower than it is. So you look at the property side. A couple of other things around the solar projects. The old, 10, 15, 7, 8 years ago, we were not placing the inverters. The sound comes from the inverters, basically converting that into AC to go on the grid. The sound that comes from those inverters, and effectively, the old, a couple of years back, sometimes we replaced those inverter boxes right on the property line of the exterior of the project. We don't do that anymore. They're placed on the interior of these projects, making sure that the sound level of the property line is specified. So the reason why you have a sound ordinance, a couple of, first and foremost, protect you folks, anybody living around these projects, so that not only the concern about sound is making sure you get a good night's sleep, that you're not going to have health impacts, but it's also just general amenity of leasing your property. And that's not going to change even if you're just to a solar project. The other thing is I'm an avid hunter. This is an area of the world where you like to chase deer. Wildlife are not affected by the sound emanating from these projects. Electromagnetic fields, just very briefly, anything that's plugged in, anything that generates electricity, that uses electricity is going to give off a weak electromagnetic field. Again, at the property line of these facilities, you're back to within background where we would have a state where Knox County has a very well-designed ordinance, so it's being revised, looked at right now, and that is to ensure setback distances to homes, all of these other features, to make sure if the project does report, any project does report, well-designed, well-set back, and ensures public health, safety, and welfare, and your continued use of property. With that, I will turn it over now to Eric.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Gable with Gable Moore, based out of our Indianapolis office. I'm a licensed civil engineer here in the state of Indiana, and I largely focus on renewable energy projects in Indiana and the Midwest. So I wanted to cover just a little bit. I think local ordinances often get a lot of attention, as they rightfully should. That's where you all have the most say in enshrining some of your values that you hold dear for some of these projects. But I want to walk through some of the frameworks beyond the local ordinances, just to kind of walk through some of the different checks and balances and standards that we adhere to beyond just those locally. Starting at the highest level, the federal level here, you have things like the Clean Water Act, which just dictate what can be discharged from the water body, including construction, sediment, and erosion control. You have fish and wildlife, different environmental agencies. The U.S. Army Corps has jurisdiction over navigable waterways and streams, and all of the sites, we do a level delineation and we get concurrence with the Army Corps of Engineers that we're not disturbing jurisdictional features, very heavily regulated features. Beyond that, there's several different codes. There's International Building Code, National Electrical Code. There's fire protection codes. There's several codes and standards that dictate very nuanced levels of design, structural and electrical design. We're not just making stuff up on every project. They're very well established codes, and they're tried and true, updated regularly, and industry standards beyond just the renewable energy industry, kind of nationwide. At the state level, again, a lot of those federal regulations are the actual authority is kind of dictated or delegated down at the state level. So you have Indiana Department of Environmental Management oversees erosion control, drainage, items like that. You have your Indiana Department of Natural Resources that oversee floodplain, floodway, and some of the important riverside ecosystems. And then for us specifically, that even has to go through a review of the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. Every best project that goes into construction has to go through that. So those frameworks in and of themselves are sufficient for a safe, functional project. Believe it or not, there are counties with no local rules, permits, anything. So these frameworks in and of themselves need to be sufficient to guide our design. But beyond that, there is robust local requirements here in Knox County. So we have a solar ordinance that specifically dictates things like noise emissions that we just talked about, screening and other important items to protect the community here. And you also have an active soil and water conservation district that speaks into the plantings on the site, vegetative management, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and then soil and erosion control again. There's also various agencies, including the Highway Department, that speak into the different elements that the county has jurisdiction over and make sure that there's no negative impacts from our project or solar projects generally. And with that, I just wanted to walk through kind of briefly high level some of the major components of the solar site and kind of how or why they're sited the way they are. So this graphic is probably a little bit hard to see. I know it's a little bit light, but starting from the outside, so before we even think about placing a solar panel, we have to carve out all of the important constraints and setbacks and features like that. So, if there's a residential setback, which there are here, we need to make sure that there's no panels, no equipment within that setback, so we carve out that area. There's streams or drain tiles or pipelines or electrical transmission lines, we carve out those easements, we carve out that infrastructure. So before we even start thinking about where we're putting panels, we're making sure we're protecting what's out there today. And then working our way from the outside in. We usually start, the first thing you see on most of these sites is the screening. So that's going to be heaviest in your residential areas, and also roadways, things like that. More high visibility sheds and receptors. Within that, there's a perimeter fence of some kind. Various regulations govern that, whether it's National Electric Code or local requirements for security. Once you get into the site, the panels are going to be the most predominant feature. They cover usually in the range of 30% of the site. Once you get into that fence, there are open areas between that for maintenance and drainage and items like that. We mentioned the inverters a couple times. It will collect power from different blocks of solar panels, converted into the AC power as mentioned before. Once it hits the inverter, it is routed to the substation underground, so there's not a whole bunch of power lines running throughout the site or anything like that. There's small gauge wires running underneath the panels, and then as soon as they get to the bigger diameter, they enter underground to that substation. Then the substation itself, that's where the power gets ready to be put on the grid. Voltage is aligned with the grid and sent there for broader distribution. So that's just a quick high-level summary. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it, and many more components such as stormwater management, erosion control, items like that. With that, I'll pass it off to Mr. Corwin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Wyman. I'm from up in Kokomo, Howard County. I have a real estate firm called Wyman Group. And also after 16 years, I retired as a Howard County Commissioner, 16 years of local government. Governor Holcomb also appointed me to the Indiana Land Use Task Force Committee. And so I had the opportunity to really get a great understanding and study land uses around the state of Indiana and things like solar projects and many other types of uses. And so what I want to share with you all today is a little bit about property values and solar as a neighbor. When I was county commissioner, I spent many times in meetings just like this, as we have in our community two pretty significant projects. One is a solar project that's about 1,500 acres, about 200 megawatts in eastern Howard County. And then we also have at the Howard County, Tipping County line, a 125 wind turbine wind farm. And during all those conversations over the years and those projects being studied, many times people were coming with microphones and property values were a big concern. And oftentimes I was hearing things being said at the microphone that were different than what I was experiencing in the real estate work that I was making in our communities. And so it just really got me thinking that perhaps I need to start compounding and putting together a real estate study on alternative energy projects in our area. So we did about 8 years ago, we started a study in the wind turbine farm. And ever since the beginning of the announcement and now through the construction period of the solar project, we have studied every single real estate home sale in both of those areas for the entirety of that period. Literally hundreds of sales. Homes within the footprint and up to a half a mile outside the footprint. And we literally can show every single one of those sales, list the sale price ratios, and compare them to the current real estate trends in any market, and show that there has been no impact on property values in both the wind farm and the solar farm area. And so it's one of those things where, as a realtor, having access to true MLS sold data and all the data about each property that we can literally track and do the actual comparisons. And so we provided those studies, and we go into the MLS, pull and do actual comparisons. And so the studies are pretty accurate when it comes to pulling that data. You know, when we do those kinds of things, it's really important for me to have some sort of checks and balances, because I can stand before people that don't know me and say, hey, we've done this study, and this is what our study's showing. But what I do each year is I can connect with 19 assessors around the state of Indiana in 19 different counties that have large-scale utility projects, whether it's solar or wind. And I share what I'm finding in my studies, and I ask the assessors, what are you finding in the work that you're doing? The assessors are rolling assessments every 12, 18 months. And every single one of those assessors, and I just did this winter into early spring, all 19 of them that I talked to told me the same exact thing this year. No impact on property values in any of their large-scale alternative energy project areas, whether it's wind or solar. And they're seeing the same trends, the same growth in values that I'm seeing in the trends and the studies that I'm doing with the actual sold data out of the MLS. So having that checks and balances and hearing that from 19 assessors around the state of Indiana, confidence level that the information that we're sharing and what we're seeing on the ground doing the assessments makes it a pretty strong situation to have no impact on property values. Putting my commissioner hat on for a second, one of the things that we always look for as elected official is, A, is our community open for business? And secondly, can we get maximum impact? And what is that going to look like when it comes to the amount of services that we have to provide for that maximum impact, such as tax revenue and those sorts of things? And here's what we found about solar and why we felt like it was such a great opportunity for our community. construction's completed, you have a project that is very quiet. You have a project that's generating revenue for a community that has very little traffic. There's no water demand, there's no sewer demand. The land actually is a temporary use, so you may have 25, 30-year project, but through decommissioning agreements and guarantees by companies and bonds, that property can be converted back into farmland. And so when you have all of those types of things lining up, and you have a company ready to invest in the community and generate tax revenue to help provide services to the community as a whole, it ends up being a tremendous win for the community from that standpoint. So I would tell you that in my experiences, both with projects in our area, ones around the state, property values do hold up. And I would tell you that the demand on services for these projects is so low that the tax impact and the economic and quality of life impact to the community is superior to anything that the community could be providing in those services. All right, at this time, I'm going to repeat.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Wilson. I'm here tonight representing Conservation Blueprint. Conservation Blueprint is an entity that, in this case, works with solar developers to think about how we can deliver multiple environmental benefits with the project. We know about the clean. Ryan is a solar developer that is interested in how can we stack even more environmental benefits on that. And the way that we do that is through a plan that I'll talk about briefly, but I first want to open up and tell you a little bit about myself, and then I come to you tonight with 43 years of experience of designing, establishing, and managing vegetation. But more than that, I'm a farmer, rancher, and so I understand the importance of the land, the importance of soil, and I know that there are people in the crowd tonight that have uncertainty. If we're taking really high valuable farmland and we're converting it to the solar project, what will happen to the soil? It's a great question to ask. It's a question that we should be asking. We have the opportunity tonight to provide you with some of the answers to those questions. I'm going to be really brief in my introduction, but I want you to know that we understand that question, we understand the importance of it, and I look forward to talking to you about it as somebody that is also a farmer and a rancher. And I'll just close by kind of reiterating what I already said, that Orion is a solar developer. We work with lots of solar developers, a lot of great ones, but Orion is a solar developer that is very keenly interested in how can we get multiple environmental benefits out of this project. And the way that many talk about if and when you ask questions, soil health, water quality, wildlife populations, just on and on and on, all those different multiple environmental benefits that are possible to deliver with a project basically happen with the vegetation on the site and how that vegetation is. So with that, I want to hand it to my colleague Lee, and I look forward to your questions to provide you with more detailed answers later tonight.
I don't think we play in the order, the seating order too well. I'm Lee Llewellyn, and I'm 40 years working in and around community and economic development. And you've heard about a lot of the technology up to this point. I'm here to just talk very simply about the bottom line is the money that this brings into the county. I have worked in a number of counties all over the state of Indiana, and one of the challenges that we see all over the state is that rural counties and communities are often bypassed. for economic development projects. So we can talk about the technology and we can talk about all of that, but I like to think of these renewable energy projects as economic development. And when you're looking at an economic development project, there's two things that really should be the criteria for looking at the impact that an economic development project is going to have in your county. Number one is adding to the tax base, which is a benefit for all taxpayers. And number two is how do we bring new money into the county? Those are the two driving factors of why we do economic development. So when we look at any renewable energy project, in this case we're talking about solar, we're talking about a taxpayer that is going to be making, it depends on the size of the project, but can be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 million dollar investment in your county. And why that makes a difference to you down the road is when you bring in that new taxpayer, it makes everybody's tax rate over time goes down. And that's one of the driving factors of economic development. Think of it if you were planning a party for a friend, and you had 5 other friends that were going to help split the cost for that party. And in the middle of planning, a 6th friend comes up and decides that they want to be part of planning the party. Everybody's cost of that party goes down. That's the benefit of having a new, especially industrial. And those dollars that are, those go to the county, but they also go to the schools. The property tax beneficiaries in your county benefit from that. Another thing that we look at in terms of new money coming into the community are those lease payments that's paid to farmers. I don't know if you're paying attention, and I know we have some farmers in the audience tonight, but for those of you who aren't farmers, this is a rough time for the ag community. A couple of months ago, I saw a report that in the United States in May, farm bankruptcies were up 130% over the last year, and they continue going up. The price of commodities is going down, the cost of supplies is going up. And so we hear this from a lot of farmers who talk to around the state who are beneficiaries of renewable energy projects. The lease payments that they are the difference between them being able or having to sell it upstream to one of the large corporations. So that's new money coming into your community that's helping you retain those family farms. The other thing that is a hallmark of renewable energy projects really around the country, but certainly we've seen it in Indiana, are the economic development payments. These are payments that go to the county that are outside of taxes, that provides flexibility for the county to do projects that they would not be able to do otherwise. So the example that I like to point to is Randolph County, which is on the eastern edge of Indiana. They now have 7 renewable projects, combinations of solar and wind, and those are $5 million. The commissioners there have been able to upgrade, provide maintenance to every bridge in the county. They bought ambulances and sheriff's vehicles. They installed a $1.4 million HVAC system in their courthouse at no cost to the taxpayers. They've made no interest loans to their municipalities to do street and sidewalk projects, and they were able to enroll every 5th grader in Randolph County in 4-H at no cost to the taxpayers and no cost to their parents. Taxpayers probably would not want tax dollars going to some of those projects, but it was an opportunity for them to do things, maintenance on bridge and other things that they couldn't do otherwise. How many of you know about what is Indiana Beach? Do you know about Indiana Beach? 3 years ago, the owners of Indiana Beach went to White County commissioners and said, we're closing Indiana Beach, we're moving out of state. The commissioners were able to take their economic development payments from the wind farms in White County and make a $3 million forgivable loan to a new owner for Indiana Beach. They're probably not open today because there are thunderstorms taking place in northern Indiana, but Indiana Beach is operating, providing jobs, providing tax revenue, providing recreation to people because they were able to leverage those economic development dollars. So, yes, it's important that we are adding more electrical supply because in Indiana and the country, our demand is exceeding our supply, which is driving up the cost. So it's important that we add that new generation source, but it's also important in our rural counties that we're bringing new dollars and new tax revenue in. Last thing that I've been asked to talk about is there are different kinds of agreements that also go along with these projects. Moving on. So for one thing, we talk about decommissioning agreements. This is an agreement that the renewable companies negotiate with the county that 20 or 30 years from now, when the life of that renewable energy project is over, the developer agrees that they will provide the financial support to remove that solar project from the farm. What is typically done with a decommissioning agreement to guard against a company that may go out of business or changing economic conditions is in many cases the developer will either buy an insurance policy or a bond to make sure that if that original company is not in place, that there are funds available so that the cost of decommissioning does not come back on the county. The second thing that they often negotiate a road agreement. We don't see a lot of long-term jobs, and as Paul talked about, you don't have a lot of cars, you don't have a lot of services that are provided, but during construction, those county roads sometimes get pretty beat up, and so the road agreement that the developer negotiates with the county, they agree to restore or actually upgrade the roads back to White County. If you've ever driven the county roads in White County, and you're going past the wind farms, those county roads with the road agreements is to make sure that there is no financial burden that is imposed upon the county, short term or long term. So I think, who am I passing it over to at this point? You?
Oh, okay. We're just going to do the microphone over here.
So before we open it up for questions and answers, I have a couple follow-up questions, if I may. First one for soil and water part of that. What are the benefits to the soil after the years, and conversely, what are the negative side effects to that soil after that time frame?
Okay, hopefully everybody heard the question that he was asking. What can the benefits be when designed properly? And that means what's the seed mixture that we're planting and how is the site managed? The specific benefits to soil health are improved organic matter, the aggregate stability of the site, and the nutrient levels. How do we know that that sort of thing happens? Because in this country, there really have not been solar sites that have gone, a utility scale solar site that has gone through 30 years and been decommissioned. So how do we know that that sort of thing can happen? One of the ways that we can give you research exact data on that is by using the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Conservation Reserve Program, which takes active agriculture, row crop, takes it out of production and plants a permanent vegetative cover on it. It's exactly what is proposed being done on utility scale solar. In most cases, it's coming out of active agriculture and it's having a permanent vegetative cover that is established on it. In CRP, those are 10-year contracts. I personally, as a farmer, have CRP tracks on our property that have been in for 23 years now. The same piece of ground, a contract being re-enrolled. Research out there on those tracts of land and what the soil health benefits and changes have been. That research is out there. We should be able to trust that and have great confidence in it. The last part of the question was, what's the negatives? The negatives, the only negatives that I could really come up with are a lot of ifs. If part of the structure were left there in the soil, if tiles or things were damaged, if cables were left in the ground. One of those ifs that I just said, there's a plan for a utility scale solar cell. If there's tiles in the ground, there's a plan for what happens if it's damaged, how to identify it. And the decommissioning plan removes those items from the soil. The only other kind of potential negative would be if a vegetation management plan is not followed closely. It's a plan for the site, and there were erosion and other things like that that occurred on the site. A vegetation management plan is a plan specifically so those things do not happen. Did that answer your question?
Yes. And the second question is actually preparing. There are a lot of concerns on battery storage, and more specifically, the generation one, if you will, the battery storage itself. Could you talk a little bit about the Gen 1 versus Gen 2, and now we're getting into the Generation 3 of battery storage, and why those failures happen? I'll give a little more detail to that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the question was, is going from generation 1 to 2 to now 3 and potentially moving into 4 in the next couple of years. So I got into this industry kind of by happenstance. I was still in the fire service, and this was kind of a part-time gig because that's fine to do. So it ended up being my fourth job that I was working at the time. And I kind of got brought on the lab side of things. And this was in back roughly about 2016 when I originally got engaged with the testing of medium to large scale lithium-ion batteries. So at that time, we were kind of looking at the generation 1 forms of lithium-ion batteries. So what that kind of breaks down to is what's the chemistry of the battery. The chemistry at that time was known as nickel manganese cobalt, so in short, NMC. It's a very dense lithium-ion battery. So one of the ways I like to kind of describe it to people is when we would test a NMC battery, it's kind of like a drunken Irishman. Not real happy, kind of wants to fight everybody, gets drunk. So we knew that when we were dealing with nickel manganese cobalt, and we bring it in for testing, we could fail it very quickly. Shortly, and I say shortly because in the grand scheme of everything, the way the industry has moved through the chemistry structure has been very short. It was roughly about 2 to 3 years later, they started to introduce the next chemistry of battery, known as lithium iron phosphate. So your LFP. The difference now when we get into the LFP is you got a less dense battery now than what you saw with your NMC. So on the LFP side now, that's more like your drunken English. It's just kind of there, he's having a good time, he likes to party. So one of the things we found is the readily available side to actually get it to go in the thermal runaway was not as strong as what we saw with the nickel manganese cobalt. That was the first iteration of the LFP, and then the LFP started to get even better. So we were getting to a point in the lab where it was starting to become difficult to get what we call propagation. So that propagation means that I have multiple cells inside the module, and I take one, I light one off inside that module, and I'm looking to get propagation from one to the other inside that module. NMC, we could do it very easily, but the more that the LFP started to kind of get fine-tuned, we started finding it difficult to actually get propagation inside the module, let alone outside the module. And now we've moved into the generation 3 where now the lithium ion has gotten better. So from our stance, the way we look at things is this. Excuse me. I don't normally talk this much, so it's very easy for me. In the fire service, we recognize that nothing is ever at 0% risk. It's just, it's not feasible, it's not doable. That's the reality. You're gonna leave here tonight, you're gonna get in your vehicle and drive home. And you are taking on some kind of risk being behind the wheel to drive home. This industry, the goal of what we look to do on the research and development side of things is how close can we get that to 0%. We know we're never going to get there because it's impossible to do. But the whole concept is how close can we get to that 0%? And that's been the mainstay for the entire time I've had the opportunity to be in this industry. And I've seen that massive shift in a very short period of time to try and figure out how to make these systems as safe as humanly possible. And that's where all the redundancy comes into play when we talk about how these tests can be performed when they do get integrated. These are things that have evolved over a very short period of time, specifically from the National Fire Protection Association. And the great thing with that specific standard as it relates to 825, like it does with everything else inside of the NFPA, is it's on cycle. So every 3 years, it gets revamped and re-upped. There were some minor changes, I shouldn't say minor, but there were some changes from 23 to the 2026 iteration, and they're now already starting to work on the 2029 iteration. One of the biggest takeaways that came out of the 2026 iteration was to ensure compliance with some of these large-scale fire tests. So basically what that means for us on the testing side is I'm going to take an enclosure, I'm going to fully populate it with batteries, I'm going to set it on fire. And then I'm going to have another enclosure, however many feet away, along with I affectionately refer to it as the nerd stuff, as I am not an engineer by trade. I was a fireman for 20 years. But we take those assets and then we start to look at all the heat structure around that specific enclosure that's on fire. And then we extrapolate out all that information and then we can figure out, based off of that model and based off of what we're seeing in that real-time test, how close we can offset those enclosures from one to the next, because we know that we're not going to see propagation from one enclosure to the next and the next. That we can strictly isolate it to that singular enclosure, not only in the worst, because of all the other redundant safety factors that are integrated in. We talk about the battery management system, thermal management system, the ventilation aspect, depending on what is being utilized. There's a multiple redundant safety aspects built into these specific systems, and they have to be tested and validated, not just by one national regular testing lab, but they also have to be hopefully that answers your question.
So, we're going to go ahead and open this up for questions and answers. If you have questions, that's very okay. If you have questions that you have specific for one of the panelists here today, we ask you to come to the microphone, give you answer the question at this point in time. This is what it's all about. Hopefully answering any questions that may still be lingering out there. Facebook is not a good place to get your answers. I hope that we've been able to provide you some information here tonight. So again, if you would, we have a slideshow here. You simply sign in, come to the microphone, state your name, and then ask your question for us at this time. Oh, yes. We did in the past. So we were free this time. Thank you. If you've already signed in, come to the mic at this time, please do so.
This, that time was I realize that this is very specific to my company, I believe church, but we do.
And this is not about rats too, this is about Lucky Point, which I know is Fremont, not Orion, but I know the aerospace manufacturing company. I'll be just about saying what's good to me, this brings time. Sure. My name is Alan Smith, I am the factory training project at 11536 East Lucky Point Road in Wheaton. My company is Precision Manufacturing Operation. We manufacture components related to Lockheed Martin in the U.S. military. Our equipment, our production facility operates with extremely tight tolerances, and vibration and disruption are legitimate concerns for our operation. I will make two distances very clear tonight. Heavy construction traffic associated with this project, the East Lucky Point project, will be traveling 75 feet from my production floor in my office area. Our production floor is approximately 105 feet from the pipeline leading this across the street. Those are hypothetical locations on a map. That's where my manufacturing specific components every day on CNC equipment. What protections are going to be in place? There's thousands of heavy truck movements, highway post driving, excavation, other construction activities are going to occur this close to an existing precision manufacturing business. Then the developer should be required to prove through independent engineering that those activities will not interfere with operation. We are asking for baseline vibration testing before construction and continuous real-time monitoring on our production floor during high vibration construction. We're also asking for an enforceable stop work provision, which is a level that threatens the operational tolerances of our equipment. Unless independent site-specific engineering proves that a closer distance is safe, to consider a 500 protection zone, another high vibration construction around an active precision manufacturing facility. We also have a high pressure gas pipeline directly across the street. And before construction begins, and then we mentioned tonight, obviously we want the exact pipeline location established and written confirmation from the pipeline operator of heavy equipment, construction traffic, and the project's connected infrastructure can safely operate around it. There are other questions that need answers as well. They're more general. Who pays the construction damages our private well? Who pays the heavy trucks damage our county road? And I'm trying to get 10 miles out with military parts on. Who's responsible if vibration shuts down the machine, causes rejected parts, interrupts production, or results in financial loss to my business? In the battery storage and the other part of this project, are our local firefighters properly equipped and trained to respond? I think you mentioned that. We are not asking the county to stop projects.
You can finish your sentence.
We're not asking to stop progress, we're asking the county to protect the people and businesses that are already here. My company existed before this proposed development. We employ people here, we manufacture here, we work here, we live here, and we contribute to the supply chain supporting our country's defense.
So, certainly understand it to the elder knowledge, but I think, again, it's not speaking about any specific project, but speaking about what you sell your business. I mean, these are very valid concerns. First thing I would say is that with any project, so that road use agreement then actually the county engineer determines which roads any project wants to transport or haul, in this case it would be panels or battery containers themselves. They need to have specific routes and they have to be abided by through that construction period. So if you had concerns with your business, I don't know exactly what road you're on or the like, but those are the things we do during specific projects with the county, raising those concerns, working with the individual developer, wherever that may be, it could potentially be going past your business. So that would be the first thing I would say is that, and then the county engineers and the county commissioners have the ability to dictate which roads can get used. In terms of the pile driving, there's a number of different ways that piles, all these piles get in place in the ground. You can strip pile or you push back, pound piles in. The vibration, there are some you can get for you. The vibration, ground vibration on those is very localized. We're not talking, they are.
I realize that, you have to understand that I'm also an intelligent man just like you, and I've read 4 or 5 studies. didn't mention aerospace manufacturing and machine shop.
And 100%, what I'm saying is that specifically to your site, your business, what I'm saying is that I can't tell you how far they're going to be from your business. If they're going to be a mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, 15, 300. And so what I'm saying is that is the type of stuff that if the project has been, again, whichever project it is, those are the concerns that bring to the commissioners, bring to the company, and try to get those answers specifically to the project. So they're valid concerns. What I'm saying is there is it out there in terms of the ground vibration from that pile driving. Again, it's only going to be a short period of time in any one location, matter of days, for moving across the site and else, and of course it'll be less. So I can't give you a specific answer today, but I'm saying that those are the type of concerns under specific CUPs or specific applications that the county and yourself will help them.
If I could, that's a very specific question, I'll be glad, I didn't get your email last night, and I'm glad to sit down with you, and develop the other, we can sit down and discuss that.
Probably like, emails, comments, for the public. Right?
Yeah, we got it. I got it, sure.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm really bad at names. I forget. I can't keep you straight. I'm sorry. Alan. So you got a question about engaging with firefighters, firefighter training?
Well, more specifically, since you're directly addressing me, I will tell you this. My wife emailed, someone mentioned Homeland Security, we emailed him to ask about that specifically. And he responded back right over here, and we asked why. There is no ordinance adjustment. That's specifically asking about Lucky Point. Are you going to put desks there? His response was no. All we have to do is go to Sun Commercial and read what happened on August 14th. It was approved. So he doesn't even know what's going on. We're learning, don't talk to them, talk to state. If you really want to have something addressed because they're not talking, they don't know what's going on.
I hear you.
I have the email if you'd like to read it. I've been willing to have it for you.
I'd be happy to meet with you afterwards if that's okay. I'd like to have the opportunity to talk to you a little further. What I can tell you is it's not abnormal in the industry, it's not abnormal to see battery energy storage systems be paired with solar panels. And what I can tell you is that through the Midwest area, we're probably going to see a lot of that kind of plan. There's been different conferences that colleagues of mine have had the opportunity to go in and attend, and they're looking with basically kind of powers to be, right? So your main lines, like your PJMs, your MISOs, your TISOs, I couldn't tell you what they stand for, but they're your main distribution lines. And they're kind of looking at what that thinking process needs to have integrated in to offset their concerns. And one of the things they talked about specifically through the Midwest area is a combination of battery with solar. So it's not abnormal, but it's definitely more of that happen. Other things that I've kind of seen play out over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to do this, is I've seen different clients, different sites where they'll initiate, and then after a couple of years, they go, okay, we're now going to augment and we want to add that battery. So it's the pairing of the two, again, is not unusual. On the training side, when we go into the training, there's really nothing special from the fire service that they need. When we look at the relates to battery or relates to solar, everything is actually very straightforward for the firefighters to be able to do. Now I say that because there are some departments that I've had the opportunity to encounter where maybe funding isn't there, right? And maybe they don't have that thermal imaging camera or that 4 or 5 gas monitor, right? Again, it's not that it's specialized equipment, it's things that they would normally use, whether it's a residential structure fire or apartment to purchase those things. So when we have the opportunity to engage with the local fire service, along with the developer, we ask them, are there needs and wants, right? Are there things that you're missing, right, as it relates to, this specific thing? And if there are, then the developer then works with the fire department and say, okay, what can we do to offset that cost so we can get you those assets should you need. From the training side, we try to promote as many trainings as possible. Service as much as humanly possible that we can. We tell them that if they want more than one training, great. Contact us, we contact the developer, we will travel and come out with how many trainings that specific fire department wants to do. We understand that 90+% of the United States is made up of volunteer fire service. So we recognize that. So we want to ensure that we give them the utmost respect and their utmost time when it comes to that training side.
So not to monopolize the conversation, but on that subject, I understand it's right now. You passed volunteer fire department. Water. You have retention ponds. Where does the water come from? A rural county go. We don't have city water. Several don't have fire hydrants. And if it's not water, it's chemical suppression. Then where does it go? So how are you putting the fires out?
So when we look at the suppression side of things, one of the things that we teach them is we we figured that out through testing and all the research and development that we've done. We found that actually the best and easiest way to handle these incidents if one were to occur. I was trying to get numbers so I could at least have an idea because numbers get lost in my head at times. So the electric power research team-ish, so they're going on 12 years now. What they found is that just in the U.S. alone, so this is not looking at worldwide numbers because these things are all over the world, just the U.S. numbers alone. They, in 2026, there were 38 failures. Now, in the grand scheme of everything, what does that mean? So when the hard part was to quantify, because we asked that internally, how do you quantify something like that? So what they did is they said, okay, well, we're going to kind of base it and look for the next time. As of 2026, they've got close to 50 gigawatts of total. And another company, I apologize if I wrote it down because I want to make sure I had it. So CleanView, in coordination with EPRI, they said that they're looking at 50 gigawatts of power generation strictly for battery energy storage systems as of 2026. And that correlates out to roughly about 1,022 operating utility scale battery energy storage systems. That's not a paired battery with solar, that's just large scale utility grade battery energy storage systems. So then everybody said, okay, well now we're going to look at the failure and we want to try to quantify that. So on their website, what they have is they have a graph, and they've done it now through 2025. And they're able to account for all the failures in the US alone. And that failure comes to roughly about 0.02% failure. Now, in the broader scope, from the side, when you look at residential failures, you're looking at roughly, on average, 350,000 residential fires a year. That essentially correlates out to roughly 960 residential fires a day. So the numerical data is vastly different between the two. And the reason why you've seen such a massive decrease in failures for battery energy storage systems is because they prescribe, for instance, standards that are integrated into and how stringent they are when we talk with developers about the integration of these systems and how they have to comply with those prescribed. We want to revamp this, we want to make this stronger, then we integrate that into the next iteration of that NFPA 55.
Yes, sir. So just feed a couple quick points to it. So yeah, it is a containers, but you don't put water, you don't put chemicals on. These are exact, these are very, hold on, so give me a second, give me a second. So the reason why, so if you think about the substations you have right here in the community, right? It's more common to have a transformer fire in a substation than it is to have a power storage container catch fire these days. And when you have where your fire chiefs and your fire department volunteers are doing the same thing when you go to a substation, that transformer burn. It typically burns, give or take, between 2 and up to 6 to 8 hours. Same thing with these containers. You To your question specifically about water, right? So the fire department's trained not to put water on things, it's electric fire. Where water comes in is that under these standards, there's another standard called 1142, where ultimately your fire chiefs are what it's called the authority having jurisdiction. They have to work with companies like Research E, who are developing the emergency response plan to say where we're going to get the water from. So if you think about it in the rural area here, right, if there's a fire in a rural house, there's not a tank of water sitting right there. The pumper truck shows up, and then they may have shovels of water. So some fire chiefs across the country will say, we'll deal with the water shoveling. Chiefs will say, no, we want actual storage tanks. Typically about 20,000 gallon storage tank up on the property. What is if there is, even though we have separation restrictions between all of these containers, information are the adjacent containers heating up. If the adjacent containers start heating up, the fire water, which is just water, no chemicals, is to spray down intermittently the adjacent containers to make sure that they don't catch fire as well. Same thing with a house fire here in town. If you've got a house fire and an adjacent house, the firefighters will often spray the roof of the house next door to make sure that this is from the container house nest. So the fire water side still needs to determine any project that happens in the county of battery storage has to go to the fire chiefs. They have to actually sign off on ERP or they can't build the project. That ERP or the emergency response plan also talks about water. In terms of letting it burn and what's coming off of that, from the discussion that Eric was having about we catch these containers on fire environments, there's a lot of air testing done by that, as well as the handful of fires that have occurred in the US. Some of them have hazmat teams where they show up and monitoring around the fence line, air quality, and everything else. There's nothing, one of these containers in any project in the to catch fire. So no need for evacuation zone, there's no need for shelter in place typically. That's always the call of the incident standard. But we don't recommend that we do that because we know that the air quality at the edge of the fence, firefighters can stand 100 feet away without supply air. So we can stand 100 feet away from containers in that sort of 2 hour to 8 hour. We're going to be spraying adjacent containers. There's no chemicals that are get into the soil. We have all this, happy to give it to you after. New York State did an extensive study on this. There's been other studies that happy to provide you with that.
Yes. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Josh Robinson, couple of questions, you all. Who audits compliance, how often, and is that on public?
Want to take one at a time? Is that easier? So who audits compliance and compliance of what? I just want to make sure I understand. So as during construction and the like. So they do have, did you want to take over, Eric, or? Okay. So during construction, they hire, whenever companies going to hire a general contractor and the like. So things like the road use agreement with the county, the compliance is then monitored by your road engineer to make sure so roads are getting torn up or anything. They have to make sure that the roads can't be in a shape where you folks can't drive that road during construction. Then there's the all pay after. So there's that kind of stuff. In terms of stormwater runoff and all of those things, if there is an issue, that environmental management, so I didn't do that. So there's a number of different steps in that. The other thing that the companies have to do is they have to hire a third-party environmental compliance monitor. So they actually have a third-party consultant for typically biologists, sometimes engineers. So there's a lot of layers of compliance. Ultimately, if there is a complaint during the construction operations, it comes back to the county, and the county has the right, of course, as we've issued the CUP, or the permit, to go out and monitor, and if they're not in compliance, shut things down.
Will the developer fund an independent third-party well water testing before construction, monthly, and 6 months after? Other people nearby.
Chris.
Ooh, that is great. Hi, Michael Kessler. I'm Vice President of Development for So I'm going to talk industry-wide, generally to these topics. There are certain things specific to our project that we'll bring up in the relevant area plan commission hearings that might address some of this stuff as well. But just talking at a high level, industry-wide standard, it is not common practice for projects to do well water testing. And that is because of a couple of inherent things about the project. It's a big concern we hear a lot about across the country, because people assume from the structural piles that are installed to support the racking system. And 3 is a concern around leaching into soil from chemicals from the solar panels themselves that get into the soil and somehow get into the water. All 3 of those scenarios are not documented to occur in relation to solar projects. So, as one of the experts mentioned, from runoff standpoints in the state of Indiana, you have to have a stormwater prevention plan for construction and operations that the state itself comes in to remedy that, so that limits the possibility for stormwater runoff. As it relates to leaching, I think as Chris went over, that has just not ever been documented to occur. However, it is more standard practice for projects to offer up soil testing, because again, if there's leaching occurring, it's going to show up in that soil. It reaches someone's well water a mile away. And 2 is the pilot. Is that you're doing these huge 50 feet in the ground to support what is essentially water. That it's very, very difficult to come up with a situation where that's going to be the case. Now, if you were building a 50-story office tower or a large multi-span bridge where those steel tiles do get driven down 50, 100, 150 feet to bedrock, yeah, that is where documented issues around how driving and aquifers come into play. It's just not a factor when it comes to soil, or excuse me, soil consumption.
One question to do with the water. Is there escrow funds set aside specifically for water? Mediation separate from the general decommissioning law?
No, again, we go back to kind of my response before, is across 150,000 megawatts installed. There are 30 operating utility scale projects in Indiana. Where of the instance where, again, well water is a concern across multiple states and federal government jurisdiction. Because of that, it is not standard practice to put up a bond in relation to concerns around well water testing.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Deb Bessie. I'm a recent addition to Monroe City. And I'm here because I don't know much about solar, so I appreciate the information you've given us, but you didn't answer some of my basic questions. So, first of all, after decommissioning occurs of a solar, you've not had a solar field decommissioned 30 years has passed, right? How long after that decommissioning can that land be farmed again?
Yeah, I mean, decommissioning typically happens after, theoretically, weather and whatnot. It usually takes, I think most projects plan for 1 to 2 years maximum, depending on the size of the project and how quickly it comes out. The procedures for doing that, again, as he outlines, the vegetation management that's there over time means that the soil will be healthy, and so pretty much what you're dealing with decommissioning is compaction issues, because trying to take out the steel posts. There's truck traffic on it, and so you need to rip the ground to lessen that decompaction. And so, you know, I'm not a farmer. I can't answer how quickly someone's going to put row crop back on there. But arguably, once decommissioning is completed, that the ground is at pre-construction conditions, that the landowner at that point will be able to do what they want to do with that once decommissioning is completed. So there's not some sort of lag time that I'm aware of, that farmers have made us aware of, that, you know, needs to wait 5 years before they're going to grow crop out there. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, to follow, to tag on to that, I should say, what is the solar industry doing to help replace some of the solar farms? We are is going to develop it in less than 1 year. So is the solar industry doing anything to help mitigate that?
So it's a great question, and we hear it often about growing food and how important food is to us, right?
I like to eat.
Yeah, we all like to eat, there's no doubt about that. This was some of the work that we did when I was serving on the land use task force in the state of Indiana. So in about the 10 to 12 year period prior to the land use task force coming to be, there's 23 million acres, give or take, in the state of Indiana. During that 10-year period, about 340,000 acres of that 23 million was converted to a different higher use subdivisions for housing, some solar, some commercial development, but 340,000 acres was during that 10-year period of 23 million acres. Interestingly, during that same 10-year period, yields in the state of Indiana went up, even though that acreage was taken out. And the reason why yields went up is farming has technological improvements just like every industry. And the seeds and the technology and how farmers are doing their farming, yields are growing on a per acre basis. So the concern about losing farm ground to development is decreased because farming takes advantage of the technologies like everybody else.
That really kind of wasn't my question. My question is, the solar industry in general doing anything to help mitigate the loss of productivity from the farm?
So I think a couple of things at that point. So first of all, look at Indiana, right? Over 30% of the corn grown in Indiana goes to ethanol. Okay, so like 30% of the corn production here in the state, and you know the minimal amount of land, and certainly, you know, as Paul said, the minimal land that's coming out into solar production, whatever, is, you know, again, is essentially offsetting some of that. The other thing too is that, as Paul said, is when you take a farm field or a couple hundred acres out and you put it into a subdivision, that's never going to be reclaimed. It's always a subdivision or some other use. It's not going back to that. When you look at the solar projects, similar to what Pete was talking about, conservation land, and take it out for a little while and put it back in, at the end of the life of the 30 years, 20 years, whatever it's going to be for that project, again, when the panels are removed, the panels are gone, the substation's gone, that land can go back into production. So there is a trade-off for a period of time where it's being used for energy. It can go back into agricultural. And the other thing is, as Paul said, we're really not taking any food production out of the American food basket or work for someone around the world. You're essentially, you're offsetting that growth.
So the answer is no, we're not actually doing to offset it. We're just
So exactly, respond in that case. Long-term industry is looking at is going to do what's called dual use solar agriculture. Dual use, so it's where you could actually do row crop in between rows of solar panels. It sounds really simple, but there's a lot of complications around it in terms of operating, which is why it hasn't been standard practice going forward, or so far. But a lot of companies are very interested in it because they recognize the concern around the land use conflict. But as of today, in terms of the threat to croplands and development, solar is a tiny percentage. Even within Knox County, it's probably talking about single digits of percentage of land that propose solar projects in Knox County out of the existing acreage of the crop farm that is currently under production right now. And it can just go into anywhere, so there's one, and then all of a sudden you're going to a proper siting to have one successful solar project. And really the limiting factor other than landowner preference, right? We're dealing with private landowners who are making a choice whether or not they want to host a solar project on the land. Is transmission. You cannot put a lot of, let me put this another way. There's only so much electricity you can put on the transmission line without rebuilding it or spending hundreds of millions of dollars to add additional capacity. So once that line's filled up, it's filled up. And so that is already a limiting factor in a lot of places in terms of how many solar projects, unlike residential, where you can just keep on building if there's land, unlike commercial or industrial development, as long as there's land you can build it, that is not a factor. Solar, because lots of where you can electronics for customers, it's very hard to do in this country, which is another reason why you see electric rates going up and why the country is struggling to produce enough electric generation to meet demand. And so that is another, probably full comfort, but just fact, in terms of you can't just build as many solar projects as one county. It's not how it goes.
I understand that, but back to the original question, the answer is no. The solar industry is not actively working to mitigate those losses. So I agree completely. Also, earlier, and I forget who said it, really well, that bringing industry like this into our county adds to the tax base, and therefore will decrease the overall tax rate for us average citizens. I worked on the East Coast. I lived in the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest. I'm 70 years old. My tax rate has never gone down. Thank you.
Wow, we spoke about our business. I'm going to speak about two things quickly. I'm a Texas licensed real estate agent, and I've dealt with this in Texas. There are documented risks. Lawrence Berkeley, 2025 Purdue University, we have a home a quarter of a mile from the proposed land. Our business is 100 feet. So I've done everything possible to protect families who live here. I've been researching what other communities have experienced, and one case particularly caught my attention. In Massachusetts, the United States Environmental Protection Agency took enforcement action involving construction of a solar development after a stormwater basin failed during storms. According to the EPA, sediment laden water left that construction site and impacted neighbors with pond and well water. That matters because we have well water. We have a 6-year-old. We have a daughter expecting a child. These are the things I'm concerned about. I want to know that our water is going to be independently tested before construction ever starts in the baseline. I want to know that there's nothing changes if there's testing, accountability. I want a plan to stick to immediately provide safe water. I'm concerned about our wildlife. Our property and across the streets covered with deer in Turkey. Research from the U.S. Geological Survey has documented that large solar development and fencing can cause habitat loss, create barriers to the movement of large wildlife. So what happens to our wildlife? Where do they go? Are they pushed toward homes, toward roads, or wildlife corridors being considered before fences and claiming that every solar farm contaminates wells or animals? I'm asking something much more reasonable. Why should we wait to find out? Once someone's well has been affected, once flooding or runoff breaches neighboring property, or once wildlife movement has been significantly altered, telling a family that safeguards should have been considered earlier is a promise. Renewable energy and protecting families do not have opposing ideas. If this project is safe, then requiring independent baseline water testing, groundwater and stormwater protections, wildlife planning, appropriate setbacks, and financial responsibility should not be unreasonable. Our children shouldn't be the experiment. Our wells should not be the experiment. Our rural communities should be the experiment. We ask that you please put proper protections in place before construction begins. NGV and fire. We don't have a layout of our driveway goes straight across the street. There's no exit for us. So those are our concerns. Thank you.
I am Phyllis Soldier, and 5723 South State Road 241. And I was just curious, how many of you came to see Brown to be here tonight? Whether 241, Capricorn Road, Park Street, any other Dutchess County road that's going to be affected by this project. You saw beautiful scenes that we see every day. The crops, the corn, the beans, the watermelon. Yes, we're concerned about the water. As we are devastated that this industry is coming to our surroundings, taking away thousands of our beautiful acres, our beautiful countryside. Most of you sitting out there are on the payroll for solar, or you're elected officials, and we elected you, although you're not listening to us. But because of you, everything that we have around us is going to be taken away. And the beauty that we have grown up with, and our kids have grown up with, is going to be gone for the remainder of our lifetime. I just hope we think about that and take that into consideration. Thank you.
My name is Ray McCormick, 6751 South McCormick Road, Vincent. This project. I'm very much supportive of this project. However, I do have questions that I have concerns. I've been a state and local and national leader on soil data. I know a lot about soil data. If you're going to see these project areas, in your case, thousands of acres, you got to get the right seed mix on there if you're going to build soil data. You're likely going to use your expert from Kansas. That makes me clear. This is a tropical climate, not Kansas. I would recommend that you use Roundstone Seed out of Kentucky that has a lot of experience in seeding these project areas. They, in fact, have also created a blend where you can graze it like sheep, which has been done in this county, but they develop pollinator mixes that the sheep won't eat. So literally we have thousands of wildlife habitat for pollinators and bees and so forth on these project areas. In my adult life, I was best friends with an environmentalist that worked for Public Service Indiana. And I worked with him on many of our synergy. They became the head environmentalist for Duke Renewables in the United States. So I've been around renewable energy solutions because he worked them on a daily basis. One of the things that he pointed out to me that he had a problem with was the excessive and overgrading of the sites. So when we move a lot of soil on these sites, you're not going to bring it back quickly with mixing. So I'm suggesting that we look at minimal disturbances on this site. All of these sites within this area are rolling land. And we're going to go, and you're going to dig and dig and dig. I would ask commissioners that they review not only the seed mixes that you're using, but those construction plans that is necessary to do all this leveling. When working with the contractor, is less expensive and better for the soils than what we broke under the panels. One of the things that they talk about is the lost prime farmland. Well, I've been worked at the national level with the National Soil and Water Conservation District. We lose on average in Indiana 3.6 tons of topsoil on every farm day. So when we're talking about the loss of prime farmland, when it goes all over your fields, across the road, into the ditch, onto the dog, that's the loss of prime farmland. When you cover on the ground with pollinator mixes and grazing sheep, that's not the loss of prime farmland. That's dual use of the land, like we do with wheat and double crop beans. We're getting two crops off of that farm. So on our properties, we would like to generate energy, clean energy. You know, my wife, my son's truck, and our farm truck all in a place. So you have a lot of people getting up there and talking about the environment, but you won't find an environmental place. We have that as a top priority on our farm, and we want you to do the best job possible. I appreciate your time that you came here and you're willing to listen, but also present facts to us. Thank you.
Just one quick thing point about grading, because that comes up quite a bit. These solar projects actually use very little grading. The agreements with landowners, typically this is again, the solar industry things, not just talking about my company, company I work for, is that topsoil is mandated to stay on the property, and obviously grading, just selfishly from an industry perspective, it's a major construction expense, and so we cite projects in areas where we have to do very minimal to no grading for projects, which means again that soil is staying on the property. It's not being moved around. It's not being taken off someplace else to another county. It's not being disposed of. The grading that does happen is usually using very light earth moving equipment if it has to be done at all. And again, our goal is to not only minimize it, just to avoid that.
Joe Holscher, 5713 South 241 Oklahoma City. Got a couple of questions. You were talking about agriculture with the solar panels. These solar panels are not going to have anything. Grazing, will it be any other agriculture other than that?
So this answer is broadly about utility scale solar, not a specific project, but in utility scale solar, the standard, if I could give one, is that the lower panel height is typically about 22 to 24 inches above the ground. Pretty low, and it's not hard to figure out why that is, because to raise them is more steel and more cost and that sort of thing. So, Mr. Kressner earlier talked about agrivoltaics is a term that we use, is something that we're kind of on the front edge of. The agrivoltaics that have been used commonly today in scale solar is sheep grazing, and then beekeeping and honey production are two agrivoltaics. There's certainly a lot of research out there about can you do cattle, and there's people that are doing it. Pretty skeptical, because I know that my cattle would rub the heck out of that, but there are people that are doing that, and then vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things. That's all very early on the front end and has not been applied in a utility scale solar environment. The other thing that is being considered is widening the alleys, and is it wide enough that you can actually go in and pave an area like that? I think that one has some application if widening that alleyway could come out in a cost benefit analysis. You could go in and you could pay this areas. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's because you keep hearing about it, and it's like, I'm also raising, there's going to be more structural problems and all this, so it's if they've actually done it. So yes, that is.
Not on utilities.
Right, and just to go a little bit further, you know, that to me is the cutting edge of what solar projects might look like in 10 years. And Orion itself is working with Purdue University on a test project in Indiana to exactly look at how to incorporate row crops into a pretty typical utility scale layout. But that would not affect, I think, kind of this vintage or this generation of solar projects that are currently being proposed in the county, but hopefully becomes more of a thing in the future, knowing that, you know, we as an industry understand concerns around food production and sacrificing one use for another use, and we want to try to come up with a viable solution that works for both parties, try to get as much use out of that land as possible, both traditional energy production and traditional agriculture.
All right, thank you. And this probably will be more. You guys down here, because you're talking about saving a family farm. My question is there a study that shows how many people signing up for these are actively farming? And how many are actually were farming, but now retired? And then maybe the ones that have inherited the ground and are leasing ground? Because as a farmer, and we don't have solar. My question is, how is that going to affect us when ground we leased before? I mean, that's fine if we want to do what we want to do with it, but there's a study that shows how the ground values are going up. Now, acres for those guys that are going to lose 1,000 acres to solar are now going to be looking. So that was my concern. It's not going to save our farm because we're going to be fighting more for that. Already going up, and the more you know, where's that? And you're also going to skip the generation, probably. Because you say it saves the farm, but the ones that typically had the farm for a while and goes to the next generation and they don't care, they were selling their ground. So now they're not selling that ground, so there can be a generation of ground that's not going to be out there. So you can answer that. All right, thank you. And I appreciate that.
And I want to say, anecdotally, have been in about 20 years and works with a lot of summer communities and a lot of summer projects. I would just full transparent, it's mixed. You'll have a certain number of people that are actually farming their own land that own it outright. You have a certain percentage of people that cash rent it. And that just really depends on what community, MSR, the demographics of this. You know, it's, you know better than I do, probably, right? It's harder and harder for a new generation farmers. It gets expensive. The markets are in flux. You know, I find a general mix across the board, across our projects and things that we work in terms of people who own, don't do anything with it, people who have estate that own land that don't do anything with it, and people who are actively farming and think that's the best place for them to keep farming.
All right, thank you. I just would appreciate that I don't do. All right, thank you.
Can you tell me if there's studies on the value of homes during or prior to the process of putting in solar panels? Like a person in our area wanting to put their house up for sale now, that's in the location, what would the value of that home be? I think there's homes in our area for sale now that no one wants to buy because they don't know what's going on. It's going to be like in 5 or 10 years. It might be 5 years, but it's going to be now.
So it's a great question. I'll answer it in two different ways. When the initial announcement period happens, and there's a tremendous amount of community discussion, and Facebook is flooded with a bunch of information that's not true, which happens often. It doesn't have to be solar. Pick the topic where Facebook floods with things that just aren't true. People get scared and people will step back at that moment. Our studies that I have done since the announcement period all the way through, and what I can show for the entirety of that period is that people are still buying even in the announcement period. People that had signs in their yard with no solar, and a big circle and a line drawn through, we're still selling at value, at full price. Wherever we're at in the market trend, that sale is matching the trend. What you find is that yes, there are some people that do not want to live near a solar farm, a wind farm, an industrial property, but there are people that do. It's no different than somebody who doesn't want to live in a two-story home, only wants a one-story. Everybody has their preferences. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, having stood on these properties and seen solar and seen wind farm, and people make comments about, that doesn't bother me, I like it. There are people that are buying those properties. So I would agree, short window of that initial fear, people will step back. But as things start to play out and people see what it is, you're going to see more impact on the property.
I'm Christina Sport, I live at 1808 Road in Vicmore. It's a great opportunity to discuss property value. So we had 2 independent appraisals done, and those showed direct loss in our property value. And we had these done right when we found out about the project, which is the one that's affecting us. We are currently surrounded on 3 sides of our home. And I'm not sure how you can compare Knox County to Kokomo. People move here for a beautiful countryside, not for the industrial. Completely different life. When we purchased our home, we paid the price to have a beautiful country home, not one surrounded by solar. You can't possibly persuade any of us that our property values will be negatively impacted, especially if we're surrounded on multiple sides. Why doesn't the solar company offer us property value guarantees if there's no concern?
Okay, so Kokomo proper city, very industrial. Where the solar and wind farms are in our area are just as rural as the properties that you're discussing down here in Knox County. As rural, okay? So the comparison is legitimate because we're talking about rural property down here. I would be more than glad, to have you send me those appraisals. I can get into an MLS down in your MLS. I've looked at properties down here, and I'd be more than glad to help you with an evaluation on that and show you what we come up with versus what you see in your appraisals.
You're not going to give me the salesman side? I'm
not going to give you the salesman side, and I don't have to because everything I do is backed by data, 100%. I don't do it. I'm not interested in doing this for any other reason than factual information on these types of projects. So when I show you properties, when I tell you there's hundreds of properties, you can look at this, but I just want to show you a quick. Say to me, this is right in the middle. You can see from the distance, it goes about there. The red circle, wind turbines. 7 wind turbines are surrounding this property. It's a $400,000 home. Okay, wind, I would argue, is way considered worse than solar. 600 feet in the air, blinking red lights, all higher decibel, way worse than what solar is. And this one is surrounded by 7 wind turbines, went on the market at $400,000, and sold same day, full price, $400,000, surrounded by 7 wind turbines. So let me speak to your solar, for example. So I'm going to show you this visual right here. This is 2 homes last July that went on market directly across from the solar project
being constructed in our community.
The two red dots, right there, both sold at full price, literally across the street from the solar. This is in eastern Howard County, as rural as it is. So what I'm focused on, in any study that I do, I will go directly into your MLS. I will pull direct sales, direct sold, show you comparisons to other properties. I can't make this stuff up. This is real data, and I'll show you real numbers. Okay. So let's talk about property value guarantees for a second. You know and I know that markets ebb and flow. And who's going to be the arbiter in 8 years, 10 years, 12 years of a property value guarantee? It's impossible over that period of time to predict what's going to happen in any real estate trend. You can look at 2008, 9, 10, 11, the worst real estate crisis we've had in the history of our country. And 11 years, 12 years later, we were in one of the biggest booms of real estate in our country. And so it's hard to track those trends. And where's the arbiter of that fall back to? Does it fall back to the county commissioners? You don't want to do that. So what I would argue, and I would tell you, and I hope Ryan is argue for good neighbor programs as opposed to property value guarantees. And those tend to work out a lot better than a property value guarantee. Because in the end, who really is going to be able to measure that and over what data are you going to use? It just don't work out.
Right, that's looked into other ordinances and other counties do have that.
They may, but I will tell you, if you read the ordinance, there's no, this is how it's going to work. Because they can't. There's no way they can predict that with a property value guarantee. So the ordinance may say it, and I would argue that it was more of a political cover at that moment than it was what's actually going to happen when it's all said.
Again, I feel strongly about the fact that I moved to where I'm to be surrounded by the 3 council.
That part I understand, okay, but from my standpoint.
Is the projected tax fix our county's budget and infrastructure, why isn't real tax being?
Although I'm going to defer to county council, that's their own responsibility. I'm going to give you Matt, how do you look at the House Bill 1176, 176 was the House Bill. It was the House Bill last year, doesn't matter, regardless. And it said quite specifically, if you do not pass, you will not be eligible for the CCMG grant money. CCMG grant money was developed back by Governor Holcomb. When you pay that gallon, that money went into that pot of money. The state has changed that this last year. And if you do not pass, you are not eligible. And so you have to now leverage those dollars. And you ask my opinion on it, I don't agree.
Did it have to be approved at that percent?
Yes, no, actually, that was the lowest percentage possible. That was the lowest. That was the absolute lowest that we could do. The county council last night approved the lowest possible number.
Even though somebody else wanted to be and it was higher than the first one.
They passed the lowest possible number. And that's long and short of it. Again, commissioners, but that is why. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's an absolute valid point.
All of these things and then sacrificing for
I'll add one thing to that. And if you look at what's happened here in the state of Indiana in the last couple of years when it comes to decisions being made at the state level on property taxes and how it's impacting us at the local level, it's pretty concerning. Senate Bill 1 really put local governments in a pinch. And what folks at the local level thought they were getting in this state when the state said we're cutting your property taxes, turned out to be not so much true. And what ended up happening, local governments now trying to find a way to fill that gap and that shortfall. And you're seeing the implementation of fees, you're seeing the implementation of additional taxes, and all of that adds up to maybe savings that you ended up receiving on property taxes. It's been a basic shift. Well, for local governments, and I'll speak up their commissioners and local government here for a second, they have a choice. We can raise taxes and fees to fill the gap that the state created at the local level, or we can look for investment to come into our community and help fill that gap. And I can promise you, with our solar farm, it's filling a gap. In Kokomo and Howard County, we are in a pinch. We have to build a new jail, $130 million. The tax revenue from this solar farm and the economic development agreement is offsetting that, and the citizens of Kokomo and Howard County will pay less out of their pocket for the jail because of this. The shortfall from SB1, the citizens in Kokomo and Howard County will pay less because of the revenue. So the one thing I try to explain to people about projects like this and why I get passionate about them is a lot of times people think, well, just the people who are getting the least benefit, and it's not the case. In a project like this, entire county benefits. As assessed values go up because of this investment, tax rates come down, and everybody will either pay a little less, or you won't get rocketed up as fast as you've been getting rocketed up in most recent times. And so that's why the investment is good across the board, not just for the area where the solar is going, and that's good for the county, and it sends the message to the world that the county is open for business.
I don't know county council what sort of businesses they're relaying that money. But Senate Bill 1, in the city of Vincennes, the city of Vincennes gets to shave $1.3 million off their budget. 1.3 off their budget. We're not as bad. We only got to shave $600,000. The school corporations, how many people did South Knox just went up this year? 6. And this is only the first year. These are not easy decisions. But I'm telling you, $600,000 on a budget the size of Knox counties, those are real dollars. The city of Vincennes is $1.3 million. There's not, I'm using it as comparison, sir. But those are real dollars that we have to now grab that we don't do.
I know that the last one don't watch, go through, but my question is the road that allows construction 7 days a week with the roads that were in 1 day, why do we not take a break? Why do the people that are surrounded by that project not take a break? Like 7 days a week construction, that's asinine. Like, I'm sorry. But where does our mental health come into play when I know we're in this stage that 7 days a week when you're concerned about the roads? And I mean, I know that the Iowa project is the Iowa project, and that's not my project, but I have very well watched a lot of these solar projects being set residential next door. So I do think that that needs to be taken into consideration. Is that all 7 days a week construction?
It's a very good question. It's one that a lot of people are concerned about, because that is quality of life for a certain period of time, right? So I appreciate that. Solar construction ebbs and flows over either 12-month period or 18-month period. It can be dependent on what the weather is like, that causes construction delays, delivery delays. All sorts of variables go into the best laid plans for construction. that inevitably need to change with the realities on the ground. It is not typical unless there is an urgent reason or any number of reasons of 7 days of construction to allow flexibility so that the project can happen and be completed as quickly as possible. The other thing is that almost under any solar project, and maybe Eric, you can talk a little bit about this some more, is that it happens in phases. So as one part of the project finishes up, ground prep, then comes in the crews to do the piles, structural piles. And so when we say it's all, it's not as if at your house you're going to be experiencing construction for 12 to 18 months. Now, 1 month might be too much for you, right? Like I can appreciate that. But most companies limit the hours during the day. There are different hours for the weekends, and if and when construction has to happen on the weekends, and during the week as well. And in terms of the traffic specifically, it is, again, not like it's 300 trucks coming down your house every single day for 12 to 18 months. In most cases, deliveries of equipment, major equipment, the solar panels, steel piles and stuff will be done to a central yard where that's dropped off. On average, you're talking about maybe 3 deliveries a day, max. And again, this is equipment that is pretty standard in a rural setting. These are flatbeds, these are pickup trucks. You know, it's not a wind project, you're not some massive 400-ton crane coming down the road. And so it is going to be annoying for sure if you're a neighbor. Construction is, I understand that, but I want to just contextualize a little bit the reality of construction. I feel for neighbors. We're sorry we're being bad neighbors during construction in some sense that there is noise and there is increased traffic, but we do both limit that and try to protect the general area as well as just to provide some reality of what it looks like. Again, it is not a swarm of 300 construction workers just coming by your house. It is spread out over a large area. It is very well coordinated, and on a day-to-day basis, it does not look like you would imagine a large infrastructure project. And Eric, I don't know if you want to give a bit more context to that at all. All right.
You mentioned, Vincent and 1.3 million, 600,000, whatever. I can understand that the county needs money. I live here, I know the county's here. I get that. I guess my question is, I make the statement, we don't live in that sense. We live in Monroe City. There's nothing to map. I don't see going around that sense. I see Monroe City being some. So, what do we get? We don't snow plow on our roads, jet black. That's why, because the county never shows up. Yeah. So my question is, if you're going to sit here and tell me that the county needs money, great. But what have you done to be lately? That's my question. You see what I'm saying? I mean, we don't live in the county seat, not Vincent. Why are you putting this in our laps? Why are you surrounding our lives? I get back to, I look at Blue Jeans and Lucky Point, surrounded by. You would do that? I would invite every single one of you to come to my house tonight, sit around my pool, have a cold drink, walk around my property. I'll show you a couple of my kitchens. Fine. We don't want to live around it. And if we are going to be forced to live around it, then do something for us.
I've never met this guy before, but he's very passionate, he's very upset. We may get things from Facebook, but if it wasn't for Facebook, most of us would know nothing at all. All of this was going on over here, that our house over near the school over at North Knox was is going to be getting, we're looking at 4,000 possible acres of solar panels, green potential. I hope you can understand why we're so upset. So I've learned way too much about solar than I can carry through over them, but through the questions and things that I looked at on Facebook, I go over sites that are legitimate. They talk about in the decommissioning, I don't know if I'm here, but the decommissioning is that after 30 years, they'll start decommissioning. They take out, correct me on how much they take out and how low they go, if they take anything in the ground. As I read, they only go down 24 to 36 inches. Is that?
So decommissioning occurs whenever the project stops producing energy. So that could be year 20, that could be year 40.
Because while we're saying that, could that be more than 30 years though? If the solar companies want to, they can go further than that.
Up to
correct?
50 years, which is the least one.
They say 30 years.
We're very open, it's just that's a standard.
A lot of people just don't, they just don't understand.
So, industry standards for minimal, again, these are minimal standards, is to remove all facilities down. Depends on the region. Again, they all have different regulations, but on average, it's usually 4 feet. And the reason why it's 4 feet is because that is the assumed level where it is safe to resume agricultural activities. The reality is that what materials are you talking about? You're talking about steel piles and copper wire. All things that are highly valuable and expensive and have a high salvage value. And so these are not particularly complicated things to remove. You can yank piles out, you can dig up the underground cabling. Because again, those are very expensive materials that only get expensive as the years go by, and so there's value in removing the entire facility itself. But in terms of setting minimal standards on decommissioning agreements, which again, that is regulated usually at the county level, it's regulated in agreements with the landowners. 4 feet is the typical standard.
So is there long-term studies on leaving out what the ground life or additional impact about? I mean, I know it's just, when I read 30 years ago, it's not these solar farms that are just now starting to decommission.
No. There are not some, like on utility scale, there aren't examples. But again, you're talking, think about the infrastructure. We're not talking about removing a surface one. That stuff has been done very consistently in the US and has shown that very intensive infrastructure and construction that sits on the ground for 50 years that is not open space like solar, that can be successfully decommissioned and the ground remediated. And so I don't have a good example of a utility scale solar project, but when you compare what the solar project is compared to much heavier industrial facilities that have been successfully decommissioned, it does not take a lot of imagination to understand why within the vegetation management program solar projects put in, why the nature of the actual infrastructure that's out to construct that it's possible. Right. The only concrete, just to be clear for your own knowledge, is usually around the substation or operations needs. Concrete foundation.
Okay, speaking of substation, there's a potential where we live, we're kind of standing in between the Hillville project and the Edwardsburg project, like it's this road and this road. So we're kind of in between both, but there's potential for a substation. The fans and the noise off of a substation would be pretty significant, I think.
So, your county has a pretty restrictive ordinance.
If I don't think they have anything on substation.
It doesn't matter what equipment it is, a solar project has to remain under 55 decibels at property line, no matter what equipment. So, substations have to be cited to be under that regulation as well.
So, one of the questions I see a lot of people that ask when people are talking about solar, and it's obviously a very hot topic. Why does the solar companies go for buildings, like parking garages and in the cities and on top of a lot of buildings and stuff? It seems like those would be more practical than going after a farm ground, but I don't know if there's a good reason for that. I mean, other than I'm seeing is a lot of red tape for solar companies making as much money.
Well, I love solar. I think it's a great technology, very supportive of doing rooftop, all of it. The fact is that alone is not going to produce enough energy that is necessary to meet the current demand in this country. The other reason is that that is going to be very expensive power. So it takes not just red tape. You're talking about stringing together thousands and thousands and thousands of homes and businesses to create the same amount of energy that one of these projects centralized can create. But it is extremely expensive. I personally don't want to see my electric bill go up. So I want to be able to take advantage of the most efficient generation resources out there. And that is unequivocally scale solar. So we are probably at minimum half the price in terms of what it costs to generate electricity at utility scale versus rooftop or those other things. All great. They should also be installed. We need it all. We need gas turbines, we need nuclear, all of that. It needs to all happen together in order to meet the current demands at an efficient price.
One thing that I really think for all of you all that aren't from here is to drive over Mainland, which is one of the, I mean, all of you have been there, some of you have been there. They have sheep over there. It's 1,200 1,500 head sheep. They're not better. They can't keep up with what's over there. I mean, I did drive over through there tonight, coming here. Part of it was mowed, obviously, because it was nice and clean cut. The road edges look terrible. I mean, we live on near Highway 159, and that's not what I want to see about high school. It's a beautiful football field. Everybody sits and compliments the sunrises or the sunsets at the football games, and now everybody's going to look out and see the whole miles of solar panels. So I would encourage you to runoff. There's huge runoff over there. That one I realize there's a lot of different solar companies that are connected. They seem all, there's so many different ones. I mean, the one goes bankrupt, that one picks it up and all that. But you can see where we're concerned that our landscape, not just is going to be solar panels, it looks like a mess. And there's sheep out there, fine, I don't care, but keep up. I mean, there's not even enough of them to keep it maintained. They're all hitting like third top. So, I mean, they just keep them. So, anyway, thank you for listening.
Go ahead. I'm a simple man, like Leonard Skinner says, that's all last weekend. I have a few simple questions, and few comments. Frank Mike, take the mic. Well, one thing about it, we need a microphone as good as the one you've got up there, because I couldn't hear much of what these people were asking questions on. But anyway, listen, Dr. Olson, I appreciate all of you being here, and I know you're giving some best answers that you've got and all that. But one thing I heard him say earlier, he said the roads can't be messed up during construction. Being driven past the, well, let's say, big one, Slab Road, that solar well out there, they may try to drive in that road. I don't know about this, roads can't be messed up. I think that question's completed. But anyway, I have a question about the panels themselves. Dr. Olson gave some information on that earlier. Where are the panels made that are going to be used in this project or these projects? Where do they make those?
Yeah, so solar panels, like any other consumer equipment, you go and look at who's got the best product at the best price. So, what particular solar panel goes on one particular project can vary quite a bit. The U.S. currently has had very significant import tariffs on imported solar panels, and what that has caused is a large rise in domestic manufacturing. So, depending on the type of solar panel we manufacture, quite a lot of it is done in the U.S. Other places, because there have been very sensitive markets, places like Korea and Japan, some manufacturers in Europe as well. But it is very expensive to take what most people get concerned about, Chinese panels. They used to be really cheap, they dumped them. The U.S. government slapped them down for that, and so there's a major financial incentive for projects cited in the U.S. to be purchased domestically from a handful of foreign manufacturers.
Okay, so do you know what percentage are made in the U.S.?
I don't have a big percentage. I mean, it depends on the manufacturer. If you're talking about a first that is fully made in the United States.
Okay. Well, I know there's that. into the solar, just, I can't remember how much, but a new
cell manufacturing facility in Jeffersonville, Indiana. And they will be making solar cells that will then be shipped to Texas to actually put them into the panels. So it will be a considerable, I mean, it is 1,500 jobs in Indiana that will be making the solar cells that will then be combined and put into the panels. So we just added, they just cut the ribbon on that facility, I think, in the last 2 weeks. So we will be actually manufacturing a lot of the solar cells right here in our state.
Oh, that's good. Okay, well, I'm a little concerned about the Chinese thing, because I know that they had scared blood there, and President Xi said those got to go somewhere, somehow, immediately. So I'm a little concerned maybe we were somehow getting those, and then I would be a little concerned about the contents and the integrity of those panels that are coming from China.
So, coming from the Ohio Rivers, south.
At least I cut the ribbon on that, right? And do those panels move at all? Do they follow the sun? Okay, we were talking earlier about sound and decibels, so how do they move those panels?
Yeah, so the panels do track the sun throughout the day. That has the direct obvious benefit of receiving more solar energy, but also when we get into glare things out, when you're directly facing the source of the light, you're not deflecting that light in a different direction. So that's a secondary benefit of reducing the amount of light inside of the glare, things like that. Did you have a different? The sound of the actual of how much sound.
Right. How are they moving those? What is it, a servo, or what is it that they're using to move that?
Yeah, there are motors so throughout the rows of panels. Each row will have its own dedicated motor. They move such a microscopic amount in a given period of time that the sound moves is negligible. Substitutions or things like that that are larger site. They are considered, but they're often overshadowed by inverters and things like that. But our primary components are voice systems.
Okay, very good. Also, I heard several people say things like utility scale, industrial property, let's see what else here, industrial size, utility scale. So, if we have to change the zoning to put these in, I would ask the commission, I guess. Are they gonna be on agricultural land that has been zoned agricultural?
I believe it's kind of hybrid between agricultural and industrial.
From what you heard?
But just to be clear, sir, like I don't think you've heard any of the experts in the panel use the word industrial. Utility scale, meaning that it's, with the utility scale means that it's going to be the solar in the grid. So that's why we use utility scale versus, let's say, rooftop solar that were, a couple solar panels in your yard, you use it in your own private home. So utility scale, so these are not, it is not common in my experience across 26 states I've worked in, anything rezoned something to industrial. It usually stays as ag land, and then, because it is an industrial use, it's utility and it's solar.
Right, I'm just a little confused when they're being referred to as solar farms, so, it's industrial, I don't really think it's related to farm, but that's my opinion. Also, I heard, I think we're still about roles and talking about federal, state, and local, and said something about the local protection being robust. Did I hear that?
Yes, I believe your existing county ordinance for solar is robust, yes.
Okay. Setback, currently 300. 300? 300.
Yeah. If you look across, so Indiana is one of the states where it's not county by county. If you look at other states, for example, Illinois, if you look at New York, if you look at Dakota, some of those areas, they have statewide deciding. It is very common for states that have statewide setting or other counties to use 150 feet from the project to the homes. Really, where you're going to go there is a combination of the setback. I mean, if you think about the safety zone, we put solar panels on our roofs, we put them in our front yard, right? So there's no safety issue on it. Typically, what you've been looking at is what is the setback going to be based on the sound studies that are happening. Yes, 300 feet is a common and more excessive than other states we have.
I think some of those states you brought up would be nearly as populated in those areas probably as well.
I can tell you that Illinois is probably one of the most densely populated. Got its wind, solar, battery storage, where you great population density around those projects that we would have here in Knox County. But again, the whole point of the setback distance is the safety. You put this in the roof, so you don't actually need any separation distance. It really is just trying to keep them a little bit further back. So here we've got a minimum of 300 feet. I know that there may be projects that will go over this.
I just looked at a lot of the other setbacks in the state of Indiana, and it seems like ours are not quite like some of those are. I'm seeing that.
Yeah, part of the challenge that I referred to as you're looking at some of those other ordinances, perhaps in other counties, you do have to be careful of is, are there actual projects in that county that built to those ordinances? Oftentimes counties will, and again, do the thing. Oftentimes if you have excessive setbacks, they're designed such that you can't get any project.
Right, such as Davis County next door.
I'm not sure. It's 2,500 feet, but it's completely, there's nowhere in Indiana you can build a project on 2,500 feet side.
You'll be on 3 minutes, sir. Am I not asking questions?
Yeah, I stopped at the next one.
Okay. All right, well, I'll try to do these last couple of ones right here.
Sir, you're the only three. We got to stick to the limit for everybody. If you have questions,
We have 5 minutes. Oh, my goodness. Well, the only thing else that I guess I would like to add to that would just be that I was about to thank the commissioners for doing what they've done.
One good, one more, go ahead.
Property values.
there's no question with your comment, sir. We just want to proceed.
Property value deal is the, what we've gone through in the United States with property value. Is that a good time to make comparisons about property value where we know there's not nearly enough property?
Yeah. You're asking a really interesting, and here's the answer to it. The property value study should reflect market trends. And so if you came up afterwards, I showed you my study, I can show you pre-COVID, during COVID, the boom at the end of COVID, and the decrease that's been happening since then. You have very defined market trends over the last 8 years. And so in any given one of those trends, in any of that period, properties that sold in the wind farm or the solar area, do they match those trends? And if they do, then you can actually show how the properties are not affected by the actual solar project or wind project. And what I can tell you in my studies is I got all those trends defined, and I can show you every single one of the properties that sold in the wind.
I again want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. There are passions on both sides, and there are questions on both sides. And we appreciate that, right? You should ask those questions. The government officials, you should ask those. But I again want to thank all of our subject matter experts for being here tonight. The auditor's office, and all of you folks here tonight. I really do appreciate it, and I hope this was a worthwhile time for you.
Thank you.